Hi guys, Jessica here with Paige. We're going to be talking about the first book in the Dark series by Christine Feehan, which is Dark Prince.
Yeah, so we're going to probably talk 5 chapters at a time. And so in chapter 1, you meet Mikhail. Like right off the bat, a couple pages in, then you meet Raven. If you haven't read the books, probably read them before you watch these videos, because we're not going to talk about every single little thing that happens. We're going to go over some highlights and discuss some interesting lore details in the series and the books.
So in the first chapter, we meet Mikhail, for the first time. You meet him, he sounds kind of brooding, and we're led to believe that he's not supposed to have any feelings. But as the book starts, just in the first page, you realize that he is feeling something uncomfortable. He was reading his books, and he said he could no longer bear the stark, raw loneliness of his existence. And I thought that it was strange, because right off the bat, he's not feeling anything.
Well, and this is kind of hindsight for us, because we have read almost all of the books. We're working on the newest ones. So not to give spoilers, but the Carpathian males are not, at his age, are not supposed to have emotions, which he will say in a later chapter. Actually, I think just later in the first chapter, he does say, I shouldn't be feeling this. Like, I'm not supposed to have emotions. They're gone. They've been gone. But he has them, and there's a reason for that.
So the first page, I just have to read it, part of it. Mikhail Dubrinsky closed the leather-bound first edition with a calm finality. This was the end. He could no longer bear it. The books he loved so much could not push away the stark, raw loneliness of his existence. That just jumped out at me because, of course, I've been through these books. We reread them every year once a new book comes out, so we know these books well. And the more times that we read them, I notice things that I didn't notice before. So coming in the first page, him saying that, I was like, whoa, wait a minute. He does have feelings. And so he goes on to tell about how the books seem to have given him, his mind, solace and given him an outlet. And they were no longer doing that.
And you find a few pages later, you find that the reason really that he's feeling this is because he's not alone in his mind. There is a woman who has psychic abilities who is sharing his mind, Raven, and she talks to him. And obviously you come to find out that is his life mate, even though she's human.
And just to give you guys real knowledge of what's going on. So after 200 years, the males of his species lost the ability to see in color and to feel. They relied solely on will, integrity, and memory to keep them honorable. The temptation to kill while feeding was an ever-present danger for his kind. For those few precious moments when they fed, if they killed, they would feel the rush, a hot flashing through their body, enveloping the brain and taking over the mind so they could relive it again and again. Otherwise, they saw nothing. They felt nothing. They saw no color. They see in black and grays. It's really a stark, empty, I don't even know how.
And that, what she just read, that is direct quote from the first book.
Yes.
So if a Carpathian male kills during feeding, he becomes a vampire, and he loses all chances of ever binding his life mate to him and keeping his soul. He loses his soul.
So there are no women to continue their species to bring them back from the darkness in which they dwelled. Female children had been few and far between, and then women began losing babies before their birth time. He was punishing himself because he felt that he should have seen the decline and found a way to prevent it.
Mikhail was.
Without women, without children, they had no hope of continuing. The males were essentially predators, the darkness growing and spreading in them until they had no emotion, nothing but the dark and a gray, cold world For each, it was necessary to find his missing half, the life mate that would bring him forever into the light. So without finding their life mate, they either had to choose to end their life and meet the sun, or they would turn vampire and lose their soul.
So that's just some background knowledge about their race that you do learn in this first book. But I think it's really important, we think it's really important to kind of just have that knowledge, so when you start the books, or if you're reading along with us, you understand why it's so imperative for them to have life mates, because vampires are very strong, very sadistic, and they're evil. They kill people, like, constantly, all the time. Like in the later series, you see vampires destroying hundreds of people. And that's from one Carpathian male becoming vampire is devastating. So they need life mates. And Mikhail is desperate to, because he's the prince, it's his responsibility, essentially, he feels, to find a way to help his people. And he can't, and he's blaming himself in this first chapter. As we move on, though, in chapter 2, after he meets Raven, she restores, because she is his life mate, she restores the color, and she restores his emotions. So he's feeling again, and it's very overwhelming for him. And he's seeing in color again, which is also very overwhelming. I mean, imagine going from black, white, and gray, drab world that has no color to vibrancy and everything in a split second. Like, that's a huge difference.
I do want to read a section, though, for chapter 1, where he actually realizes that he's been, for hours, been sitting here grieving and feeling awful, and then it finally hits him that something is wrong. This is what he said. This is what the book said. Grief overwhelmed him, consumed him. He lifted his head and roared out his pain like the wounded animal he was. He could no longer bear to be alone. Yet how could he feel pain or grief? Why in the last few hours had he felt such complete despair when he couldn't feel? Was he finally losing his mind, along with all hope? And then he hears, the trouble is not really in being alone. It's being lonely. One can be lonely in the midst of a crowd, don't you think? Now someone is speaking in his mind, and to him, a human should not be strong enough to be able to penetrate his walls and his mind blocks. Because, among other things that are Carpathians, but they are psychic, and they have psychic abilities, and they can communicate through mind links. They can speak telepathically. Yes, speak telepathically. She said it better. So now he's realized that somebody has penetrated that. And he's shocked and awed at what's happening. Then Mikhail became still, only his soulless eyes moving warily, a dangerous predator scenting danger. He inhaled deeply, closing his mind instantly, while all senses flared out to locate the intruder. He was alone. He couldn't be wrong. He was the oldest, the most powerful, the most cunning. No one could penetrate his safeguards. No one could approach him without his knowledge. Curious, he replayed the words, listened to the voice. Female, young, matter-of-fact, highly intelligent. He allowed his mind to open slightly, testing paths and looking for mental footprints. And then she speaks to him again. I have found it to be so, he agreed. He speaks to her. Sorry. I have found it to be so, he agreed. He realized he was holding his breath, needing the contact. A human? Who gave a damn? Something, no, someone, had penetrated the depths of his pain and interested him enough to respond. Who could speak telepathically other than one of his kind? The puzzle made no sense, but it mattered little to him. He was interested, caught, and intrigued.
So essentially, Raven pops in his head. He starts feeling emotions. That throws him off because she's human, And he's confused, so he goes to investigate. He sees her, and he has his emotions and color back, and the only way to get that back is finding your life mate. So even though she's human, there's no other choice. There's no other option. Like, that is his life mate, period. End of discussion. He kind of seems like he feels like, oh, well, you know, okay, this is crazy, and this, I didn't know this was possible, but
she's mine, and I'm not going to let her go.
Yeah.
Pretty much from that moment, Raven was on a path that she had no idea that she was going to be going down, and it would be for the rest of her life.
Yeah, and of course, Raven being very independent and strong, I mean, her psychic abilities were strong enough that she was able to help police track down serial killers, and that really caused her a lot of mental anguish. That's why she's here in the mountains. It's like a retreat, a mental retreat. She's taking a mental break, trying to heal, and then, she stumbles upon Mikhail. Raven is a really great character. She's probably one of my favorite females in the whole series, that out of all, 37, 38 books?
37 books.
She's top 5 for me, definitely still, even after all these books. I mean, they're all great in their own way, but Raven was really the first one to kind of toss independence at the Carpathians, at the males, like female independence. And she fights for it the whole time because they're very protective. Because, I mean, they have to be. If she dies, their whole race dies because Mikhail would die. Because Mikhail would follow her to death. Like, he couldn't live without her. And they can come off as overbearing a little bit, but it's all with love. It's all good intentions, and she knows that. That's kind of why she gives Mikhail hell for it a lot. She's like, I know you care, but I'm still going to be independent, and you're going to get over it.
Yes, because she's like, women have strength. I've been hunting down serial killers for years, saving people in my own way, and you just come along and you think you're going to put me in bubble wrap and hide me from the world.
Yeah. And definitely did not let that happen. So that was pretty much chapter 1 and 2. Chapter 3, you're introduced to Eric and Celeste and Byron and Vlad. And then, by extension, Vlad's life mate, Eleanor. Celeste and Eric, Celeste is pregnant, Eric is her life mate. Eleanor is also pregnant, and Vlad's her life mate. You meet Byron, who is Eleanor's brother. Very protective of her. Obviously, they all are very protective. I will say, in this book, just in hindsight, reading it, it seems like even though they're all supposed to be not young, for sure, in Carpathian standards, they all seem very weak in this book. I feel like from this point on, they all get crazy powerful. And the difference between Dark Prince and, say, even... Which one's Julian's book?
Dark Challenge.
Dark Challenge. The difference between Dark Prince, the power difference between Dark Prince and Dark Challenge, I feel like they make such advancements so quickly. The males and the females even power up so much just in between those years. It's kind of crazy. So as you're reading on, if you go back to the first couple books, you're like, what's happening?
I think it was because it was her first book in the series. And in that standard, they seem like if you only read this book, you would think that they were incredibly powerful. But as you go forward in the series, you realize that the extent of their powers and their healing powers are
unparalleled. They're crazy.
Not even close.
They're godlike almost. You also in this chapter, in chapter 3, you learn what happened to Noelle and Rand and their baby. The baby survived. Noelle was murdered. Noelle was Mikhail and Jacques' sister, who Jacques you also meet. And Jacques is the youngest brother in the family. Can't seem to really find anywhere where it says what order the siblings were born in, really. We think Noelle's the youngest of Mikhail's family.
Paige thinks that Noelle's the youngest, but I think I think
Jacques is youngest?
I think Jacques is the youngest, and Noelle is...
Like, in between them?
In between Mikhail and Jacques. I just feel like Jacques is the baby.
Because he kept his light for so long. It's really said in the series, in the story, especially in this first book even, that Jacques definitely had feelings a lot longer than most of the other males. He wasn't as dark as all of the rest of them, really.
And he had a boyish charm and humor.
Yeah.
And he still kept his humor. I think that's why people felt like he kept his emotions longer. I don't know if it's about his emotions longer, but the memories of his emotions, so he could still tap them in his mind and feel them. And I think that's why he was still able to be so lighthearted and funny, and he didn't really take things seriously.
Yeah, so either way, I mean, I would really like to know how the family went, because we know Mikhail had an older brother who is dead. Mikhail was the second oldest, but all we know about Jacques and Noelle is that Jacques' the youngest son, but it never states anywhere that we can find, even online, if Jacques is older or younger than Noelle, or what order they were born in, which I think would help a little bit with us knowing their ages. And it's even not really implied anywhere if Noelle is younger or older than Jacques. So that would be really interesting to find out.
Yeah, it would be. And then in this chapter, you also, in Noelle's death, we find out that we have human butchers, or humans that are fanatical and think they're looking for vampires.
But really they're finding Carpathians who are not vampires. But it's not that... the humans, I mean, the humans are thinking Carpathians are vampires, and unwittingly they're killing innocent Carpathians that haven't hurt anybody. And then, of course, if they ever came across an actual vampire, that would be they would die. Totally different.
They wouldn't even have a chance.
Yeah. Oh, and you also hear in this chapter, because Noelle is dead, and then you learn that Rand and Noelle were not true life mates. Rand and Noelle both had this sickness, and Mikhail says that the sickness tends to run in his bloodline a lot, like his older brother had it, and it's kind of just, it makes them like obsessive over other people that aren't their life mates, which is not normal, because normally Carpathians only have eyes for their other half, and nobody else really interests them at all. And with Rand and Noelle not being true life mates, that sucks, because that means they were both somebody else's life mate, and with Noelle dying, that either condemns a Carpathian who's still alive, or, maybe her true life mate had become vampire already. We don't know. I don't think we ever find out. And then, of course, you do find out later who Rand's life mate was. But their baby is sent to Deidre and Tien, who are two other Carpathians that are mentioned. Mikhail makes a choice to send his nephew to Deidre because she has had so many miscarriages, and he feels that she would do everything to protect that child because she wants a child so badly. And then that's kind of when you learn that their women and their children are dying, and their women are not able to keep their babies alive. They're not even able to really feed them, I believe it says at some point.
I think they said that Noelle was the first female child born.
She was the last female child born in centuries, so.
Right, so she was the only one that they had in centuries, and now she was gone.
So all of that implies that all of the other females still alive are much older than her.
Mikhail was also worried about, because Deidre had lost so many babies, her life mate was having a hard time keeping her here. So Mikhail was hoping that by giving her the baby, that would
make her will to live strong again. Yeah.
So that they didn't lose the two Carpathians. Because if one goes, the other one will follow.
Yeah, so if Deidre would have killed herself because of her depression from her miscarriages, then Tien, her life mate, would die with her.
So they don't actually, like, commit suicide. They more meet the sun.
Which kills them, because most of them can't survive in the sun.
Right. So it's different from, like, a real... It's different. It's not like a suicide. It's
an honorable death versus becoming vampire.
Yes. Because that's your only option. You either stay Carpathian for eternity and
find your life mate,
or the darkness takes over you and you either choose the honorable way or you lose your soul.
And if you become a vampire, you lose your soul. In this third chapter, they also talk, Mikhail mentions essentially how he's the one who's supposed to be dispensing justice to those of his people that turn, but his second in command, Grigori, also does the hunting of the vampires. It's kind of their responsibility, but you really, in this book, it seems like really they make it seem like they're really the only two hunting. But we learn later that is not the case. That there's a lot of them who actually hunt the undead.
And being the Carpathian male and inherently dark and the darkness taking over more, it makes it harder for each Carpathian hunter because every kill that they make to them feels like their darkness takes over them more each time. So as they hunt and they protect Carpathians and humans alike, the darker they feel they become inside. So it's harder for them to hold out. It's just kind of a rough and miserable existence for a hunter that doesn't have a life mate.
Yeah. So in chapter 4, because we just talked about the first 3 chapters, really, overviews of those. But in chapter 4, essentially, Mikhail commands Rand to sleep in the ground, because the earth heals them. It's supposed to. They're like children of the earth. Rand is definitely sick, like mentally ill, with just he has a lot of rage. He's got a lot of, him and Noelle, they were obsessed with each other, but it was very toxic. And then when she died, he said he wanted to hunt down her killers, but with him being so unstable mentally, Mikhail was like, yeah, that's not gonna happen. Just go into the ground. Which causes a big problem later for the second book, and we'll learn about that when we talk about the second book when we're reading it. That's pretty much really all the big things in chapter 4. But then when we get to chapter 5, Mikhail is searching for the people who killed his sister, Noelle. And one of the things he says to Jacques, his younger brother, because now he has Raven to take care of as well, and he has to think about her safety. So if something happens to Mikhail, it's going to happen, like, Raven will feel the effects of it. So something to add into this is that the reason that the Carpathians get a little bit of a rap, or people would confuse them with vampires, is because they do exchange blood. They survive on blood, like the vampire in a story, but they don't kill to get their blood, and they don't hurt people. So Mikhail and Raven have exchanged blood once. They're connected in that way now, and that makes their mental bond even stronger. So if something happens to him, she can feel it, and vice versa.
So they're connected, mind, body, and soul, when they find their life mates. And you really have to connect those 3 together. So you'll have the physical exchanges, the mind, where they pretty much are a shadow in each other's mind whenever they want to, coming in and out. You know, their feelings, their thoughts, their past, their history, and then through their blood exchanges. So essentially, their souls are brought back together and they're finally both whole.
Yeah, so life mates are 2 halves of the same whole, so they're born from one soul that is split. We are given to understand.
And the Carpathian male is the dark half, and the female, whether she's human or Carpathian,
or whatever else she is
the light, and they can't have that light to their soul until their life mate is connected with them.
Right. So in chapter 5, when Mikhail goes to look for the people who killed his sister, he mentions to Jacques that if anything happens, he asks Jacques to make sure Raven's okay, and then reminds Jacques that he's next in line to rule the people if Mikhail was to die, and that he would have to have Adair Troznov as his right hand. So right now you have Mikhail, who's the prince, who is the vessel of their people, and that runs, the vessel runs in the Dobrinsky line. And then you have Adair Troznov, who is Grigory, who is his right hand, his protector, and when they come together, extraordinary things happen. Together, they are powerful.
So, Dobrinsky is the vessel, and Adair Troznov is...
kind of like the key.
Yeah.
The key to the power. Right now, all they know of, the only Adair Troznov left that they know of is Grigory. So, Jacques would have to ensure Grigory's loyalty. You also hear mention of Aiden and Julian, who are in America, and they are two of the people's of their people's hunters. And they also talk again about how most male children are mostly children born are male, and they don't usually survive the first year of life. So that's the first 5 chapters. I will say not super much happens in chapter 6, except I believe the second blood exchange between Raven and Mikhail. So we'll probably end this episode here, and we'll do the next 5 chapters in the next episode.